In this video, I'll show you how I made this diorama of an ATST stepping on a T49 airspeeder. Hello everyone, my name is Spencer and I'm trying to become a better miniature painter, diorama maker, storyteller, and I like just sharing my practice projects. For this project, I'll be using this model kit by Bandai. Really handy, simple, the instructions are inside of the box, and everything's push fit, so it's pretty accessible as an entry-level model. I've actually had this box sitting on my desk for quite some time, and I was having a rough week, so I decided this would be an opportune chance to listen to Noah Kahan's new album and make these models and relax a bit. This project will also serve as my submission for Boylei Hobby Time's monthly Patreon art challenge, and the theme just happened to be Star Wars land battles, so it really worked out. Overall, the assembly for these miniatures is very straightforward. You just need a pair of clippers to get them off the sprues, and then a hobby knife to clean up some of the remaining sprue marks. One of my main goals for this project was just to kind of have fun and see how much of a project I could complete in one weekend. So these guys, requiring very little effort or, dare I say, skill, really came in handy and just were a fun project for me to work on. All the pieces went in without much force or confusion. And really, it was just a really pleasant Friday night that I spent building up these guys. When I first got these models, I think I was originally planning on doing an airspeeder, like doing a WWE grab on an ATST using its cable cord. And I think I might explore that again in a future project. But for this one, I wanted to tone it down a bit, maybe make it a little bit more haunting and a little less comedic, so that I might be able to put this at my desk at work or something. Once the miniatures were assembled, I then focused on the base. I had this little plastic box that I thought would be appropriate with the rough size, and then I broke out my straight edge to make some nice angles to cut this foam on my hot wire table. I cut the foam off camera, but I did dry fit the models to make sure it was roughly the right size. However, it did look pretty flat at this point, so I decided I wanted to make a little bit of an elevation step using some corkboard glued on top of the foam. To help tie in the cork a bit more to the rest of the terrain, I then just ripped out some chunks of the cork to create like an uneven rocky cliff face texture. This also ended up helping with the ATST's step onto the airspeeder. Next, I broke out my rotary tool to pin the models onto some painting stands so that I could make sure to get access to all the details I'd needed later. At this point, it does kind of look like foam and cork, so I wanted to tie it together a bit more, so I applied Mod Podge to the entirety of the base just to help smooth out some of the finer details. Once the Mod Podge is dried, I then put down a piece of paper for priming. Overall, the priming process is pretty simple. I just chose to take the easier way for me personally, breaking out my airbrush to apply some black primer through it. I know airbrushes aren't something that everybody has, but it was raining a lot where I live when I was making this project, so this was just kind of the easiest way to do it, and since we're at such a small scale, it just works for me a little bit better. But you can use a rattle can prime if you'd want as well. For painting both the ATST and the airspeeder, I decided to keep using the airbrush just to get some preliminary colors down. The ATST got several gradual layers of Vallejo's silver gray. This does take a few coats, but it helps build up the shadows slowly. And the airspeeder, I carefully went through building up various layers of Vallejo's white gray. The difference might seem pretty minimal and nitpicky, but hopefully side by side you can see some color differences that'll help differentiate them later. For the base on top of the black, I just applied a Vallejo Charcoal to the entirety of the base. Not super worried about this process at this point. Again, I'm just trying to see what I can accomplish in a short amount of time, so I'm just kind of throwing paints on at this point. And then on all the rocky surfaces, I took a makeup brush and I layered on some rocky outcroppings of a mix of charcoal and Stonewall gray from Vallejo as well. Next, to really theme this as Hoth, I put on some Pro Acryl Snow texture paste all over the top. I didn't really care too much about how heavy this went on. I just wanted all the future snowy bits to be covered at this point with some snow, and I did have to go in and texture it to make sure that it's not too wavy. I wanted to keep the painting process pretty simple for all of these models, so I started with a little bit of a gunmetal on the back of the airspeeder, making sure that the recessed fins of the airspeeder engines were blackened in, and then the back of the airspeeder was a neutral gray from Vallejo. I really tried to make sure that I was getting this into the depths and recesses of the model to give it a bit more life. The cockpit ended up just getting painted a Vallejo black. And then I went in and I applied some Vallejo chipping medium to all the places that I wanted to paint with some of the accent colors later. You can't really see anything happening on screen right now, but I promise in a later step it will kind of really bring this model to life. And then moving to the accent colors, I just used a Army Painter Ultramarine color. Just because I didn't want to do the standard Rebel Red, I wanted a little bit more individuality in this diorama piece. I did come back in and clean up some of the edges to make sure that all the details were really highlighted. And then I can grab both of our models and move on to the oil wash. To wash these models, I'm using a burnt sienna, ultramarine, and black from Windsor and Newton. This is not a perfect process, nor am I an expert with oils, but I do know that a pure black wash is boring, and then a blue and a brown help bring it to life in a bit more of an oily machine way. Pretty much once the wash is diluted and the color I liked, I just slobbed it on the entirety of both of the models. I did make sure at this point with the airspeeder not to push the blue too much. I gave the oils about 2 hours to dry, and then I came back with a makeup brush dipped in white spirits to help wick away some of the oil. This is also the point where the chipping medium got reactivated, and you can see some of the blue paint flick away almost in a perfect pattern that I was hoping to get on this airspeeder. Doing this leaves the oil in the recesses and really just brings a lot more depth into all the model. The ATST I actually ended up hitting multiple times because I really wanted some clean panel lines from it. I was trying to get that Hoth episode 5 aesthetic as best as I could. In areas where the wiping motion didn't work, I did dab a little bit here and there. Oil washes are pretty nice to work with, especially when they're so diluted, so they'll be wet for a long time, and I don't necessarily have to worry about ruining anything anytime soon. While the oils dried a bit, I wanted to make a snow paste out of this matte medium and soft flake snow from Woodland Scenics. Again, I've never tried this before, but I wanted to go in. I added a bunch of soft flake snow and gradually added in more and more medium until I got a nice whipped cream consistency, I guess. And then I just took a loaded up brush and I dabbed on top of the entire base an amount of snow that you could leave some impressions in. I did get a little trigger happy with it here and there, so I did come in and remove some of it where I thought it wouldn't make sense to have snow, but that was pretty easy to do just with a dry brush. This next step was where the confidence of the project really had to step up. I took this airspeeder off of the base, and then I took a few practice crashes until I shoved him into the snow terrain and glued him in place to seal his fate. Ultimately, I was actually really happy with how this looks. It actually looks like a crash. And then I could get the ATST off of his base as well, and I cut out the cork beneath his feet so I could make some little snowshoes. I knew where I wanted the ATST to be, so I dry fit him on top, just making sure everything had the correct positioning. And then I took the snowshoes behind him and I kind of made some footprints by pushing down into the terrain paste before it had dried, just to give a little bit more detail for this project. At this point, I realized this airspeeder that had been destroyed had not been damaged, so I came back in with my Dremel tool and I just gouged a few blaster bolts into the area that was visible for the rest of the diorama. To do that, I just painted some black into the holes and then highlighted it up with some neutral gray. Both were from Vallejo again. Finally, for a final bit of battle damage, I wanted to add some charcoal basing pigments to the engines and around the blaster marks on the airspeeder. To do this, I just mixed up a little whitewash and I put it over the blaster marks. Once I was happy with how the airspeeder was looking, we could finally glue the ATST into place and also secure his foot on top of the snowspeeder's blaster. Finally, we can paint the sides black and move on to some glamour shots. I'd like to take a moment and say thank you to each of you who stayed through to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. These projects are just a way for me to share my imagination with the rest of you and give myself a bit of an artistic outlet. If you want to see other incredible artistic outlets, like I said before, this project is my submission for Boylei Hobby Time's monthly Patreon art challenge, and I'll make sure to link both his channel and other cool projects below. But other than that, I love y'all. I'll see you around. I hope you all have excellent weeks, and I'll catch you in the next one. Toodles.